4-webinar series. For those of you who may be new, my name is Sylvia. I am the main field agent at Land for Good. Mike will be our facilitator today and introduce our guest. He is the Vermont field agent. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Land for Good, our mission is to keep farmland farming, and we do that by expanding land access, securing tenure, and facilitating farm transfer through one-on-one work and things like this. I just want to take a minute to thank our sponsors that make the webinar possible, and that is the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and Northeast SARE. And with that, I would pass it along to Mike.
And we are today in our last of our 4 webinars. And this is, as I've mentioned before, my favorite webinar. Not just because I get to largely sit back compared to some of the other ones, but also because we get some great stories from people that that we're going to have here today on the panel. I think it's very instructive. We try to get people from different who've had different pathways, different stories about their farm transfer and succession, and come at it from different angles. And we're going to have a couple of the perspectives of the younger generation in addition to some of the older generation. And the way we're going to do this is each of our panelists, there will be a total of 6. We'll go through and spend about 10 or 15 minutes telling their story. We'll give a few minutes for questions for them, but just a couple minutes because I want to get through all the speakers. So we have at least a half an hour where people can ask all the speakers the same question. Very often we'll get different perspectives from the different panelists, and then have a chance for dialogue too. And if people want to share some of their own stories, this is probably the best opportunity in the webinar series for people to kind of, engage in that way. And so with that, I am going to start with Eugenie.
Thank you, Mike. It's nice to be here. I see some familiar faces. My name's Eugenie Doyle, and I am the part of the senior generation at Last Resort Farm in Moncton, Vermont, Northeast Addison County. Transferring our farm to, my husband and I are transferring the farm to one of our sons. The farm itself is a 265-acre organic vegetable, berry, and hay operation, and maple as well. We have a farm stand at the farm. We sell to 3 farmers markets, have a farm share program, and sell wholesale, mostly in Burlington. We have been here, my husband and I, and our kids have been here since 1986. My position on the farm right now is as the co-owner of the real estate with my husband and with our son, Silas. I'm also a consultant. And I would say right now at this point, I work part-time on the farm, manage the pick your own strawberry operation, garlic braiding. I'm sort of the farm historian, social media person, which shows that we sometimes are scraping the bottom of the barrel on that particular enterprise, and do the farm newsletter. So brief overview of our transfer story. We've had several transitions here, and maybe some of you can relate to this. We started out as dairy farmers on a 28-cow dairy farm in Brookfield, Vermont, that not surprisingly turned out to not be a viable. We also had 2 acres of strawberries there. They were much more profitable than the dairy. We figured that more would be better. Does that sound familiar? So we moved to Addison County, figuring everything was better near Burlington. And we came up here in 1986. We had sold our cows in Brookfield, came up here, bought a herd of Jerseys, and we're milking 60. So not a whole lot, but 60. That also didn't prove to be enormously profitable, although it was really wonderful way to raise our family. And we also continued to grow strawberries. We sold our cows in 1994. And at that point transitioned to organic strawberries and vegetables. And my husband went back to school and got a job with the state of Vermont. So he was working part-time. And because I had the kids, I was also actually working part-time there. So there were two people working part-time. We'd given up dairy. We were now into organic agriculture, and we're always pretty much trying to build up the farm a little bit more. And then our kids grew up. Long story short, our kids grew up, went to college. Our older son, by 9 minutes, because he's a twin, graduated from college and went to China, worked on an agribusiness like consulting company in China, completely remote. Came back and decided that was not agribusiness was not the way to go. He wanted to rejoin the family farm. This came as an enormous surprise to us. This was not something that we had thought would happen. And we weren't really, we hadn't really invited him to do this. So I kind of liked the scale we were at, and my husband kind of liked it. So we said, yeah, work for us. That's great. It's hard to find help. So he was really good help. So that went on for a few years. However, he did show himself to be enormously dedicated to this pursuit. And we began to manage it as what he called the three-headed monster, which was my husband, myself, and him, with more or less equal decision-making responsibility in our little in our departments. That did not work for him. He did call it the three-headed monster, and he said he said he was the future, which is really true, but it wasn't really easy to hear at that point. This was in about 2016. But we began to look at the future and realize that although I wasn't ready to retire, neither one of us were, that we needed to make some plan. I mean, we'd been reading all the stuff that everybody reads about you should make a plan, but we hadn't made a plan. Although at about this time, Enid Wanacott at NOFA started having gatherings of senior generation people to get together, which was pretty hysterical because mostly we talked about how difficult our children were. But it was helpful. And we went from Silas's expressed desire to do this to consulting with a lawyer. And in 2017, formed an LLC with the three of us with a 15-year lease to own arrangement. So we are now in the 10th year of that. He next year will own the majority of shares. Right now, he still doesn't. And what needs to happen now is, I think, pretty much to hold this course by 2032, he will have 100% of the shares and the transfer will be complete. So Mike asked us to talk about the main challenges here, and I would say they are many. One is other children. We do have two other children, so we had to figure out, okay, if Silas gets the farm, even if he is paying something for it, that is an inheritance that the other two won't have. So we had to deal with them. Turns out they didn't really want it. So that worked out pretty well. Another big challenge is housing. We did have to, after 2 years ago, we finally made the switch, and Sam and I moved off, very close, but off the farm. We built a house in an area adjacent to the farm. Decision making, enormous challenge for us. That's an ongoing thing, but I think what has happened is, as he's been in there, he is expecting himself to make more of the decisions, and he is expecting us to make fewer of them. And it is not easy. And I will just say that I think that's probably been our main challenge, especially in the areas where we feel, one or the other of us feel, that we actually do know better. But that's an ongoing thing. The way around it, I think, has been to have a basic sense of trust that in our son's motivation and in our own abilities to communicate with him, and ultimately to let go of control. Who has been the most useful resources? Originally Enid at NOFA Vermont, and NOFA Vermont has continued to be very helpful to us. Richard Wiswall at Farm Viability, and through VHCB, spent an enormous amount of time with us, going through figuring out enterprise budgets for every crop, being a mentor, a very specific mentor to Silas in situations where he wanted to make changes of things that we had done, so we sometimes didn't have the answers to questions that he came up with, and Richard was very helpful in coming up with those. At ag mediation, I really think getting help is a huge, basically the name of the game here. And ag mediation through Farm First was very helpful to us. Our lawyer, Joe Fallon, unfortunately, he's not in business anymore, so he's retired, but he was very helpful to us. Other family members, let's see, yoga, meditation. Silas's ability to write grants turned out to be, who knew? We never, he didn't know he could do it either, but turned out to be really, really helpful on the finances of what he was doing. Was both expanding the farm operation as he took over, and grants were very, very helpful. Let's see, advice to others or cautions. The first one is get help, I think, in those many ways that I've mentioned. Second, I think, is to ask yourself, what do you really want? And what do you want out of the farm? What do you want out of the things that you've given all your life to? What do you want to preserve? And I think for both Sam and myself, that has been, number one, a good relationship with our family members, but also the elements of the farm that we felt we were most successful at and really loved the most. For me, that was strawberries. And for Sam, it was haying, which he still is actually doing pretty much all of it, because you cannot hire anybody to do that, it turns out. And Silas can't do it all himself. So, and I think the third thing in terms of advice is to keep the farm and the land itself as a focus and as a guide for making decisions. That when we have had arguments, and we have had many pretty healthy arguments, we try not to have them when our other help is around, because that turns out to be actually not a very good idea. If anybody wants to hear more about that at some point, just call me. But I think having a common sense, having the feeling that the farm, the reason we're doing this is to feed people and to preserve the beautiful land that we are stewards of, and keeping that in mind, that we are stewards, and that we're only marginally like owners of this anyway. That has been very helpful. So our next steps in our transition is pretty much to continue through this lease to own program, support Silas and his family, help raise the two grandsons that we have over there now, take care of ourselves, be generous, and I think this idea of focusing on, since he is a family successor, not like a non-related person, we have the opportunity to be a lot of help. And I think making that switch from being sort of begrudging people that are being replaced to being people that are actually helpful, we've kind of made that transition, and I think that it's much more pleasant. It's also enormously needed. The challenges right now are amazing, like climate change is and lack of money are out there, so not to be underestimated. And I think that's probably it.
That was great, Eugenie. Well, I'm reminding everybody you can put questions in the chat. We do have a couple minutes here. For, if anybody wants to ask questions, either open your mic or to put a question in the chat. And while we're giving people a second to think about that, I wanted to just ask you to clarify a couple things, Eugenie. What does the LLC actually own? Does it own the real estate and the means of production, or just the means of production?
Yes, to clarify, when we started this process of 2017, we formed two LLCs. Well, we formed one to own the real estate and one to own the business. And Silas was the only member of the business LLC, Last Resort Farm. And then the three of us were the LLC that owns the property.
So the lease to own was on the real estate.
Exactly. And he started out, at that point, he started out owning the business.
And then I don't know if there's anything that you want to say about the conservation easement on the farm and any role or interest issues that came up around that.
Thank you for asking. I forgot about that. Yeah, which is very important for us. So in 1994, as we were thinking about selling the cows, we did conserve the land with what was then, it was VHCB and the Addison Community Trust. Neither of those do the conservation easements in the same way now, but we did that in combination with developing 60 acres of unused pasture that we put 12 houses on. 4 of those were affordable housing, which is why the Addison County Community Trust was interested. So it was a dual goals project. I don't know if they're doing those anymore, but that gave us the money to pay off the mortgage on the farm. So that had also helped enormously in transferring it. At that point, the land trust was not doing OPAVs, the option to purchase at agricultural value, but that came in later. So also around 2017, I think, maybe shortly after that, we were able to get an OPAV through the Vermont Land Trust, which also gave the farm some financial support, considerable. So yeah, big fans of conserving the farm.
And could you just clarify, how old was Silas when he first came back, and how old is he now?
These are hard questions. Let's see, when he first came back, he was 26, I think, 26 or 27, and he is now 38.
Okay.
Or 39, I don't know.
So there was a question in the chat. So how did you put values on the business and the real estate?
Mm. Okay, two separate things. We worked with Richard Wiswell on doing this. So the business itself involved mostly equipment, and then some sort of the name. But the business itself did not have a lot of assets to transfer, but we did have a lot of equipment. And how did we come up with the value? I would say we, kind of agricultural value and stuff that we sort of figured out. We were pretty generous. We were very generous. We also had really old equipment. And that is something that Silas is really good at, dealing with really old equipment. He also really, really likes really old equipment. If anybody needs anything, come by. We probably have it in several editions.
And then the when you're in the lease to own on the real estate, how did you value the real estate at that point?
Okay, so the land trust actually we were going through the OPAV at the same point, and they actually put a value on that.
So they had an appraisal done.
They did. Yes, we had a reappraisal done. Yeah.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll have more time for questions at the end.
Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to say quickly,
okay.
Just of putting off questions to some other point. So Farm First has a peer mentor program, which I joined as a mentor some time ago. And it is a good place for people to have other questions answered if they want to. It's somewhere you could get in touch with them. There's probably a farmer peer there that has a farm like yours and would be interested and available to talk to you free of charge.
Eugene, we have people here from outside of Vermont. I know in general that the Farm First programs are only available to Vermont farmers. Would this be an exception, or would that still apply?
I mean, hey, I'm sure there are exceptions. There's not much money. There's no money involved here. So.
Right. It's not like they're counseling, they provide counseling services, right?
Exactly. They refer people to that.
Yeah. So, but outside of Vermont, there's also ag mediation is available, for family facilitation and family conflict and that sort of thing, and that's available in all states. So with that, I'd like to thank Eugenie again, and ask Will Stevens to open his mic and give your presentation.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Can you hear me? Okay. Great. Okay, good deal. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name's Will Stevens. I live in Shoreham in Addison County, Vermont. My wife, Judy, and I started farming in 1981 on what is now Eugenie's farm, actually, for a year. We are a first-generation certified organic farm, focused mostly on vegetable production and greenhouse bedding plant sales. We've got about 10 to 15 acres of the 84 acres into potential vegetable production and crop rotation. The balance is in pasture and hayland. After 3 years of farming in Moncton on rented land, we had a chance to move to Shoreham and a kind of agricultural community at the time, and started Golden Russet Farm. Basically, our start was an outgrowth of the Back to the Land movement. We didn't have a business plan. It was mission driven. Like Eugenie, we felt as though if we could grow good food for our neighbors and sell it at a reasonable price, we would be supported, and we have been. Got lucky on that one, I guess. We began mostly as a farmers market operation, and gradually expanded our offerings as demand and our abilities and interests changed. We did farmers markets for 30 years in Middlebury and Burlington. We ran a CSA for 25 years or so. And basically the current marketing model is a combination of retail farm stand sales and wholesale to stores, health food stores, co-ops, and restaurants. Let's see, over the years, well, I think it's still fair to say that the farm sells about 90% of everything we produce to people who live within 15 miles of the farm. And we are about 12 miles from Middlebury and 40 miles from Burlington, which are our two main markets. Let's see, revenue-wise, well, I should also say that I am now known as Pauline's dad. Pauline is our daughter who has taken over the farm. So the numbers I'm going to give you are Pauline's numbers, not mine. But they're consistent with kind of when Judy and I left off. About 40% of sales are bedding plant sales, retail farm stand. About 17% are cut flowers, and the remaining 43-ish% are vegetables. That's the balance of the crops. Put another way, 40% retail, 60% wholesale. So what got us to this point? We had been talking a lot about getting out of the business for many years, but not doing anything about it. We'd hoped that maybe an employee would be willing to take over and all that. And when that was clearly not going to happen, and we got more and more tired, we finally let the kids know. We have 3 children, and we let them know that we were ready to go and move on. In early 2017, we started talks with the Vermont Land Trust about conservation. And 6 months went by, and by the end of that year, Pauline had been thinking about it. And as we were driving back from visiting my father in Western New York, she said she was interested in leaving her job and returning to the farm. So I was able to not drive off the road when she mentioned that, but we were surprised because we'd never put any pressure on the kids to be a part of the farm or any expectation at all. Pauline, that said, Pauline was our middle child, and she was the one who always worked on the farm through, elementary school and junior high and high school and college. So if I had to pick which one might do it, it would have been her. And in fact, it was. She left a job that was 2 blocks from her apartment in Burlington, working for an environmental nonprofit with benefits and salary and all that good stuff to come back to the farm. So that was pretty awesome, but that changed things. We stopped talking to the land trust. We started talking to Pauline. We got involved with VHCB's Farm and Forest Viability Program. They connected us to Mike, and we got going on the transition. Right now, she currently owns the means of production, or what Mike calls the intermediate assets, and we still own the land and the buildings. As far as what I'm doing now on the farm, or what my wife Judy and I are doing, we are kind of supporters, cheerleaders, part-time labor. Judy honestly is a little more active than I am, especially in the greenhouses. Although I will say that a couple of years ago, when our long-term employee hurt his back, and which knocked him out of commission for months, I did kind of literally get back in the tractor saddle again, and we got stuff planted and up and running. So because that was needed, but I am less involved than I ever have been. Succession overview. Pauline's right now beginning her 5th year of operating the farm. She operates as an LLC. We ran it as a sole prop for 40 years. As I say, she completed the purchase of the means of production last year. We had a 3-year note that we worked on, which she paid off last spring. She and her husband have moved into the farmhouse and that she was raised in, and are expecting their first child in 3 weeks. So that's pretty exciting for us. And we, for our part, have built a new house on the farm on the site of an old mobile home, and took advantage of the infrastructure. And so we're still kind of nearby, but not kind of looking at everything that has to be done all the time. We anticipate selling the land to her this year. More, she's pushing for that. We're not. So it surprised us, but it looks like they're getting ready to move on that. So that's all very exciting. As far as challenges we've experienced, we should have started the process a whole lot sooner than we did. And that said, there's no guarantee that Pauline would have been ready. willing or able to have stepped up the way she has. So, but from our perspective, making plans when you're kind of on the top of the wave where you can see where the shore is always better than in the trough of the wave where you're about to get swamped. And so if we could have thought about this a lot sooner, that would have been just better, I think. And that said, having a business plan, including a capital plan, would have helped with that, would have helped our long-term planning and thinking around investment issues, especially late in our ownership and tenure as operators. Succession transfer issues. As I say, we didn't start with a business plan. We kind of started with just a good idea. And if there was money in the checkbook, we were doing really well. So, but I can't emphasize enough. This is a say as I do, not say as I say, do as I say, not do as I do moment. Business plans are great. Other challenges, biting my tongue is hard. Advice is rarely appreciated or taken when it isn't asked for. We've learned that. I should have involved, or maybe we should have involved Pauline more actively in all aspects of the operation, not just the field work and the off-season planning. Things like, changing oils on equipment and just simple maintenance things would have been very helpful, I'm realizing. Another challenge has been giving her the space to move the farm in her direction. Stepping back and just kind of letting her define the farm instead of letting her operate our farm. The first couple of years, she did decide to use mom and dad's playbook, which was to her advantage because she had built-in markets with crop demand and all that stuff. So that worked very well. But finally now she's starting to move in a slightly different direction based on a lot of factors that are important to her. There were only there were two of us for 40 years. There's only one of her. Her husband has a great off-farm job and helps out on weekends and emotional support and everything else, and that brings both benefits and challenges. I have to also say that certain tasks aren't getting done that would have been done because of not enough labor. And that said, they have a much better work-life balance than we did. So I just need to put that on the table. I need to better define what jobs and type of support are both appropriate and things that I want to do in my kind of retirement. That includes, finding off-farm activities that would frankly limit my availability. But as a strategic kind of piece, that would be helpful. But the bottom line is that we want her to succeed. Judy and I both have examples in our family of intergenerational business transfers that didn't work. And the upshot of that, in my case, I've got 3 generations of fallout from one of them that didn't work. So, and like I say, on both sides, we have these examples. They're not pleasant. They're not fun. They're very ugly, in fact. And we just don't want that to happen. So that said, we're not putting on rose-colored glasses, but we want her to succeed. So my goal is to be available but not directive because it isn't our farm anymore. She doesn't need the additional performance pressure coming from me. And I also personally get no pleasure from telling anyone, I told you so. So she made the decision to return to the farm. There wasn't any pressure from us. And so we want to support her in that. As Eugenie mentioned, another challenge is just the fairness and equity question. It's something it's going to be ongoing once she buys the land and so forth. What about, assets and how do you, what is fair to them? They're not interested in the farm like Eugenie's others, and which that makes it easier. But just in terms of long-term family issues, that's a piece. What's been useful for me in the planning process? There's the man right there, Mike Gia, and VHCB and their Farm and Forest Viability Program. I can't say enough about both of them for making this happen for us and our farm. Having a third-party neutral and independent consultant is huge. It was absolutely huge. Mike was able to dispassionately ask the difficult questions that really need to be addressed and asked that would ensure that everybody's interests are going to be met to the greatest extent possible. there's no way we would have done this internally without Mike or another person's outside help. But because it was Mike, I'm just going to give him all the credit. There are a ton of emotional and other type of triggers that families have that are difficult, if not impossible, to get past without outside help. And it was really great to have Mike just kind of pushing on kind of, helping us identify what our needs are, what our interests are, kind of what are the possible challenges to kind of reaching those goals, and so on and so forth. Plus, he had all kinds of access to information that would have taken us a lot of research to have uncovered on our own, including financial market opportunities, crop mix ideas, sales approaches, things like that. So thank you, Mike. In terms of cautions or advice, again, I'm wary to give advice when it's not asked for, but because Mike asked, I would propose that we think about, or you think about, especially elders, think about creating a retirement path well before you're ready to put your feet up. It'll ease the process considerably. Find constructive ways to occupy yourself off farm during and after the actual transfer. Be ready to clearly define your interests. What does success look like to you and to your successor? And then identify what it's going to take to get there. What are the barriers as well as the opportunities? What are some of the elements that could, that would include? Some of the elements would include economic, financial issues, legacy issues, cultural issues, things like that. Whatever it is that pushes your buttons, take them all into account when you define success. And conversely, what does failure look like? And is it an option? Distinguish between short-term learning opportunities and long-term real and meaningful damage that might be done if something doesn't work out. So I think it's, there's no point in running from it. You might just, and this is where the third-party person can really help out. As far as next steps, quite simply, with a little one on the way in 3 weeks, it looks like we're going to be looking for new ways to support the farmers, and it could look like babysitting. And that's it.
Thank you, Will. Again, anybody wants to put questions in the chat, there's an opportunity to do that. Will, could you just clarify, how old was Pauline when she came back to the business?
Yeah, when you asked Eugenie, I actually had to do the math here. She was 28, and she is now 39. Sorry, gosh, I know when she was born. She was born in '89, so she's now 37. So just by way of comparison, Judy was 21, and I was 26 when we started farming in 1981. So that's frankly another piece for me, which is agency. We built something up, rental property, all this kind of stuff, and that she's taking on a fully formed business. But it's important to me that we let go because I was 26. She was older than that when she came back to the farm. She's going to be kind of in her late 30s when she ends up owning all the assets and so forth. What am I waiting for? So that was really important to us to not get in her way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had Pauline on this panel before, and she reached out to me earlier in the month to kind of get advice on the real estate purchase. And then when she told me her due date, I was like, well, I guess I'm not getting you on the panel this year. Maybe I can finally get one of your parents, because I've been asking for years to get on the panel. One thing that Will, he kept mentioning he doesn't have a business plan, but I will tell you that one of the things that was really helpful is that Will, who did most of the books, was a really thorough bookkeeper. And so I think we probably could have done an enterprise budget to figure out if they're making money on green beans or broccoli, because there was so much detail in there that was really helpful for the analysis. And then one of the other things that came up that I guess we didn't fully work out was one of the jokes in our meetings was we have to get back to what does Will do, because Pauline was working with her mother in the greenhouses and with all of the enterprise aspects that she was involved with. But then Will would be off somewhere doing something, and we're like, well, we have to know what Will's doing, so Pauline knows what Will's doing, so Pauline can either do what Will is doing, including apparently like tractor maintenance stuff, or that Pauline is going to hire somebody to do that, or assign employees to do that sort of thing. So I guess there's more work to be done on that end of it.
Yes, there is.
And I did also want to just emphasize that that other thing that's related to that we're talking, and I think it may apply somewhat to Eugenie too, maybe, but there was two very active owner operators for this business, and then we got down to one. And so that was a discussion that we have. This is not unique to this farm, but a discussion. You've got two owner operators who are going to put in way more hours and output than any employee. So sometimes we're looking at, you might have to hire two employees to replace one of your parents rather than just one, because you're not going to find somebody that's going to put in the same hours as an owner operator. And that seems like there's still some challenges there. Any questions? Any questions from anybody else here? Hearing none and seeing none, I next would like to thank Will again and then bring up Regina Beidler.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Regina Beidler, and I live in Braintree, Vermont, which is in the geographical center of the state for anyone not familiar with Vermont geography. And I'm going to be sharing some experiences from both ends of the succession spectrum today. My husband and I were first-generation farm seekers in the late 1990s. And we actually transitioned our farm to new owners almost 4 years ago in 2022. So hopefully some of the things that I'll mention will be useful for those on both ends of the spectrum. We started well before we were ready to buy a farm. I say that we're first generation farmers, but both Brent and I had grandparents who farmed, and then farming skipped a generation. So a lot of our childhood summers were spent going down to Eastern Pennsylvania, where both of those families had farms, and spending time there. And Brent in particular decided very young that he wanted to be a farmer, and he was quite diligent in figuring out ways to learn what he needed to do. We lived in a rural Vermont town here where a retired mill worker who lived across the road from his parents' house had a few cows and a lot of broken down equipment, and was glad to have a young kid tag along. And so he did that. Worked on crews out in Kansas during the summer, learning how to drive big equipment. And then during college, he went to University of Vermont and took a 3-year break after his freshman year to go and work for a number of different dairy farmers to learn the skills he wanted to get to be a dairy farmer before coming back to University of Vermont and getting his animal science degree. So his pathway was very linear. Things took a little bit of a hiatus when he decided after graduation to go and work as an international agricultural volunteer in Bangladesh for 3 years. So he did that, came home, we got married, turned around and went again, and were international ag volunteers in Chad and West Africa. So by the time that we arrived home in the mid-90s, we had very little money, almost no assets, but we were still really determined to farm. And I was really grateful, I'll say we were very grateful for the generosity of the agricultural community who responded when they saw our intentions. There was a family that lived in Rochester, Vermont, who we had known prior to being away, whose 2 sons were ready to go off to college, and they invited us to come and work for them for 2 years while their sons were away at school. And part of our arrangement with them was not only to have a job and a place to live, but that they would help us to raise a group of heifer calves that would give us some equity in the eyes of lenders, that we had some legitimacy when we went and asked for money. So they helped us raise a group of heifers. And at that same time, Brent was diligently putting together spreadsheets and a business plan to show lenders that we had done our work to know what we were asking for and that we were a good risk to borrow money. And there was at that time a small organic dairy community in the state willing to share their own numbers in real time so that our spreadsheets were based on real figures, not on ones that we were imagining or optimistically hoping for. So can't say thank you enough for all the people who really were willing to get behind us and believed in us and were willing to generously share and help us along our way. So as we were getting about a year out from our calves, now heifers getting ready to freshen for the first time, we had our business plan, we had our spreadsheets, we went to FSA, said, we'd like to milk 40 cows organically, and here's our numbers to prove that it's financially viable. And without even looking very closely at our information, the lender said, quote, nobody milks 40 cows anymore, and organic is a flash in the pan and it'll be gone really quickly. And they said, we're not interested in lending to you. I know that things have come a long way since the late 90s, and I know organic is treated more kindly now. But for any lenders who are listening, I think just the openness to understanding that there are multiple ways for people to farm, and there's a lot of different ways for farms to be viable, is a really important lesson. We were really fortunate that we had a family member who believed in our vision, who was willing to lend us the money to buy the farm at the rate of interest we would have paid FSA. So when the time came, we knew we would have backing to do that. But we didn't know how we were going to find a farm. Usually, if you talk to farmers, the best farms are not found through realtors. The best farms are through word of mouth. And so we were working at this dairy farm in Rochester, and anybody who came through that we talked to in the ag community was, do you know of anybody who's selling a farm? So there, when I was about 7 months pregnant, I was sweeping mangers in the dairy barn, and an older farmer named Tink Camp came by and was talking to the owner of the farm. And I said, do you know of anybody who is thinking about selling their farm? And the owner of the farm we were working at said, these guys are really hard workers. They're really good at what they do. It would be great if we could help them find a farm. And unbeknownst to us, on his way home that day, Tink stopped at a farm over in Randolph Center in a family that he knew was probably at a point where they were ready to transition, and mentioned us. And so about a week later, we got a call saying, there's this family that wants to meet you. Can you come over? So we traveled over the hill and we sat in their kitchen, and the family was unusual that it was 3 siblings and their mother, who was almost 100 years old. The brother had been paralyzed in a farm accident many years before. So one of the sisters was doing most of the farm work. So we introduced ourselves. They got a good look at us, asked us some questions, asked for some time to think about it. And then we didn't hear anything for 2 months. Our heifers were getting bigger and bigger and closer to calving. And then in January, they called us and said, could you come back? And at that point, we had a newborn baby. And we went, and they told us stories about the farm. They told us about the pigs they had and the different animals they'd had over the years and the different things they'd done. And we left that day, and they said, could you come back next week? And we came back, and they told us more stories. So finally, I said to Brent, we need to ask them if they want to sell to us. Like, our heifers are going to calve soon. So we went and said, would you be willing to sell to us? And they said, yes, we would be willing to do that. And I give them enormous credit again. They had sold the development rights to the Vermont Land Trust. So they had a conservation easement that they had already gotten before we showed up on the scene. And they were very willing to sell to us at agricultural value, although the Land Trust did not say that that was a necessity. So they asked us what we could afford. We came to an agreed upon price and a time frame for handing things over. And in May of that year, about 2 weeks before our first calves arrived, we were able to take over ownership of the farm. And I think it really went, for as naive as we were about the process and how it went, I think things went more smoothly than they probably should have, as far as people being gracious and understanding. Because of the age of their mom and the disability that their brother had suffered, being a quadriplegic, they actually lived in the farmhouse for a few months after we purchased it. We didn't charge rent or anything. We rented a place nearby. There was some rough spots as they continued to kind of use the farm as their sort of, they butchered pigs one day when we came home, hanging from our tractor bucket. There was having yard sales in the shed for many months, but eventually things did transition. And they actually lived across the hayfield next door, so they could watch everything we were doing. Which we decided very early on is never a good idea. And that when we were ready to leave, we were going to move away so that we couldn't watch, because I think everyone does things a bit differently. So here we were, we settled into this 150-acre farm with buildings that were still in use as a dairy operation, but in really rough shape. We just got busy right away setting up pasture paddocks and water lines, and got started farming. So organic dairy was the center point of what we did for the time that we were on the farm. When we came, there was 2 years needed to get the land eligible for organic certification. So we shipped our milk conventionally for 2 years. And at the time we were ready to get our certification for the dairy, Organic Valley came to the state and offered a milk market, which we were a part of until we stopped milking cows. And that's been a very positive thing. And then alongside that, we really wanted to use our own creativity in other ways. So we did horse-drawn sleigh rides for a number of years, which was a great way to connect to the community. We raised cut flowers. We had a cut flowers CSA that was very popular in our town. And again, a nice way to connect to the community. And Brent grew some small grains, some spelt and some wheat that we ground into flour for some local co-op stores. So because we were shipping our milk into a national cooperative, this felt like a way to be able to connect to our community. And that was a really positive thing that we did. And we put our heads down. And for 20 years, we just farmed. We have one daughter who is now 28. At the time she was getting ready to leave high school and go to college, we were certain she did not want to farm. She wanted to be an attorney, which is what she is now. And so when she went off to college, we started to talk amongst ourselves, what's going to happen? Because when we came to the farm, we very much had the vision that this was going to be a part of our life, but not all of our life, that this was going to be a significant stage, and that we should think about what it was going to look like as we started, because we wanted the end to be graceful. So one of the things we decided early on was that retiring debt was the most important thing. We had a mortgage, we had equipment payments, we had other things. And so for the first 10 years, we had one tractor, which was very inconvenient, but we made it work. You know, we had old buildings, we had old equipment, but as we went along, things continued to improve. We were able to replace things. The soils got better. The pastures were more productive. So the diligence required really paid off. But we were very careful that we wanted to pay things off. So we paid off our farm in 18 years so that we had the land and the buildings paid for and all the equipment paid for, so that when it was time, we weren't going to be handicapped by having a lot of debt that had to be serviced off of whatever happened from the transition with the farm. So about the time our daughter left for school, I can still see us changing pasture fence one morning. I said, how are we going to do this? We had three choices. We could either sell it as it was, the cows, the buildings, the equipment, to somebody else to walk into an existing operation. We could sell the cows and do something entirely different with the farm, but that would just kick the can down the road further because we'd still have to sell it someday. Or we could sell the cows as step one, keep our calves and heifers and raise them into maturity, custom graze for other people, do other ventures, and then eventually get to the point where we're ready to sell the land. So we chose that last option. In 2019, we sold our herd of cows, and I can just say, if anyone has ever worked with cows, it has been the worst day of our 33-year married life so far. It's like giving your children away. You know, we understood that they were units of production, but we knew and loved every one of them. And we sold them to a lovely young Amish couple in New York State who we knew very well, and we're sure we're going to take very good care of them. But the process of loading animals into a truck and watching them drive away, I could just weep right now thinking about it. So it's horrible. She only have to do it once. But after that, we pivoted. The other thing we wanted to decide is what would our life look like for work? Because at the time, my husband was in his mid-50s. He still had years ahead of him. What did he want to do? So he went to nursing school. He's now an RN, went to Vermont Technical College and got his nursing degree. And I actually work for Organic Valley, so have a job with them that I continue to do today. But it allowed the level of farming we were doing at that point with grazing and haying really worked well with being able to have other pieces that we were putting into place for our work lives. The farm doesn't work as well when you're not milking cows. You know, we didn't have the same fertility that we had when we had a full milking herd. There's something about the rhythm of a really well-run farm when you have livestock and grazing and haying, and everything just works the way it should. And it didn't feel as smooth after the milking cows left. So we decided in the spring of 2021 that we were ready the next year to transition the property. Brent was finishing nursing school. We had found another piece of land to build a house on. And then there's that moment where you just think, I don't even want to tell anybody that we're selling the farm, because who's going to show up? And there's probably going to be people you don't want to sell to. it just opens up this vulnerable feeling inside of you that you think, I'm going to hand over this thing I've taken care of for 25 years to somebody else. So Mike came and sat on our porch with us and talked us through it, basically said, you have more control than you think you do. You can insist that anybody who expressed interest proves that they have the money to buy it. You can say, I'm only going to sell to somebody who wants to do this kind of farming and not this. Basically, you have control over how you put this out and what you say is okay with you as far as prospective buyers. So we had a longtime neighbor who's a realtor in our area who was willing to come up and look over the farm and value it for what he thought a farm was worth at that moment, which in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, was, you all remember how much land values were going at that point. And then we listed it on Vermont Land Link and the New England Land Link, which if you put it on Vermont Land Link, it automatically populates to all of New England. So within 2 weeks, we had 9 offers on the table of people who had money to buy it. Some people wanted to have 2 acres of flowers, and that's all they wanted to do. And we said, nope. Somebody wanted to do conventional dairy, and we said, nope. But there was a young couple from Rhode Island who very much wanted to do, we thought that their vision for what they wanted to happen at the farm fit really well with what we hoped would happen. So we set up a purchase and sale agreement with them, and they actually came into ownership in the spring of 2022. Transition off of farms is really hard. I think by the time we actually moved off the farm and had the closing in April of 2022, we were just tired. We had taken apart a whole operation and we had sold equipment and gotten everything ready, and we were ready to move on. And we did move away from that neighborhood. We live about 15 minutes on the other side of town. And so we've given them the space that we wanted them to have to be able to determine what their operation looks like. There was an OPAV that would be available at that point of transition, and we handed that to them, wanting them to have a bit of a foot up as they got started. And I'll just say that, our farm continues to live on in our minds. I think it looks different and functions differently now, as it should, because it's no longer under our ownership. But I think we still hold that identity as a farmer, even though we are no longer farming, and we have a lot that we still sort of hold inside around us. And we know the value of having new things to do and enjoy, and we're really happy with where we're living now. So there is life after farming. It is hard to step away from that, but we still feel like there's a lot of good years ahead. And Mike, I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you, Regina. I was lucky enough to meet them the first year that they ended up on the farm in Randolph. They had, I was at that time, I was farming full time and then teaching part time at Vermont Technical College. I was teaching forage crop production, and so I was always trying to get my students out to farms surrounding, and their farm was right adjacent to campus. So I had actually brought my students to visit the previous owners, and then met Brent and Regina when they first came there, and always really enjoyed and appreciated being able to bring students to that farm so close, where it was such intensive management for grazing in particular. They were a great showcase farm there. And so one thing I just wanted to clarify, and again, anybody wants to ask any questions now, Regina, want to put any questions in chat, please go ahead and do that. Both Eugenie and Regina have both mentioned the OPAV and the option to purchase at agricultural value. Just want to mention that really quickly. That is any easement after 2004 in Vermont is now automatically has that in there instead of the right of first refusal. And without getting into the weeds of that, it's supposed to be an affordability tool that helps restrict the future resale value to some extent, and particularly gives them the option for the easement holders to, if a non-farm buyer is going to come in and pay basically an estate value for the farm, they have the option to come in and intervene in that sale and buy it at agricultural value. And so there's an extra value to that. It it makes the easement worth more, so it can make the farm even more affordable. And Massachusetts was doing this before Vermont, so all the easements in Massachusetts going back into the 90s have this. Maine is now incorporating it. Occasionally, it's being incorporated in New Hampshire. Rhode Island, I think, is labeled that, but I don't know how much they're doing it. Connecticut is still, I don't know if it's, I don't think it's finally gotten approved in Connecticut. New York has a different approach, but it's a very similar approach. It's called something different in New York. Vermont is the only state that I know of that is allowing, when people had an easement before 2004 without it, they're allowing the sale of what's called a retroactive OPAV. So anybody out there who has a farm that was conserved before 2004, this becomes an option to help make it more affordable to the next generation. The state has some money towards that. I'm actually working with a dairy farm right now we're considering that for helping that transfer to the next generation. So I did want to since that OPAV gets thrown out there and nobody knows what the hell it is, just want to make sure that was clear. Any other questions out there? Thank you, Regina. That was you did fantastic. That was really thorough and great. Okay, now is Baird out there? Get Baird. Baird was there, and then
Yep, I just saw him.
Baird?
Here he comes. He's here.
Okay.
There we go. Had to unmute me too.
All right. Is your camera on?
I think so, right?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
See it. Yep.
So I am Baird Swift. I am the current owner of Haynes Dairy, and we're a 60 cow organic dairy in Claremont, New Hampshire. My position on the farm is owner of the livestock and the equipment, and there is another party that Mike has been working with prior to me. So I am actually on the other end of the spectrum from the other speakers. I am the purchaser, and the other party has taken part in events, but not in the meeting today. So we're on year 6, I guess, of a farm transfer. And I think Mike was probably working 4 or 5 years prior to me coming around. I found Mike at a pasture walk. Actually, it was at Brent and Regina's farm. Mike was there just as a field agent, right? Is that your position, Mike? So it wasn't at a Land for Good event per se, but going around the circle, like Regina, I shared with people that I wanted to milk cows, and after the pasture walk, Mike came up to me and told me about the couple that he had been working with. So that's how I learned about the farm that we're on now. I think maybe a couple months went by and we had just a meeting, and that turned into more talk. And I think it took 5 to 6 months from when I first originally met Mike to when we had agreed to move here. So I have a wife and 2 kids, 1 kid at the time. We had a house to sell and leave our jobs to come here. One positive thing was there was housing here available, which is not the case always. So the owner of the real estate had a house on the farm, and his parents had the farmhouse who had passed away, and so we were able to move into the farmhouse. The other generation is still helping on the farm, less and less, I guess, as time goes on. And like some of the other struggles, we're going from basically 2 families running the farm to just the one. So that's been one of the biggest challenges that we're having to overcome is where is this labor going to come from? So the other generation is still helping with cropping and barn chores. So there's that. Some of the most useful resources. Our transfer has been pretty straightforward, but basically we've been working solely with Mike. But we really haven't had any hiccups. We've been lucky as it's gone pretty straightforward. The biggest hiccup has been just getting the financing for the assets that we needed to purchase, which were the cows and the equipment. So once we were able to overcome that, we've been pretty good.
Could you maybe
really
expand on that, Baird? Could you just
go ahead,
explain the
Mike.
problems you guys ran into?
Yeah. You want to?
No, I think you should.
Well, the biggest thing was that no financing was going to happen for the cows, and we didn't have the collateral needed to purchase the equipment and the cows together. So the owner of the cows, financed them for us, which made it so we only had to have a loan for the equipment. So that was one of the biggest challenges, but we were able to overcome it. And one of the main ways we overcame it was that I ended up working for John and Beth for over a year while we figured out how we were going to overcome that. And one reason for we did that was to just prove that I was committed and able to take on the tasks associated with running a dairy farm. Is that what you wanted, Mike?
Yeah, I think just the one other additional thing is that you guys had an idea of what you thought the cows. Both parties agreed, both John and Beth and you had agreed what the value of the cows were, but Farm Service Agency did not agree with that assessment of what
Correct.
the cows were.
Yeah, so to keep things fair and not beat John and Beth up on the price, that's kind of how we overcame it. It wasn't a particularly good time in dairying when we were making the transfer, so the bank was not real interested in that. They liked holding the note on the equipment though. But so the next part that we're gonna work on is the transfer of the real estate, and we're not really certain what that's gonna look like. We needed to get the cows and the equipment paid for to be able to use that as collateral to buy the land. So I think what we're kind of running into right now is there's also some improvements that need to be made to the facilities that are going to kind of hold us up a little bit on the land transfer, because once again, we just can't afford to buy everything at once. To make the improvements on the facilities to make it so we can milk cows for 10 more years. So that's where we're at with that. We're not in a bad spot, but just more problems to work through, and we're probably going to need more help from Mike in the near future, where we really haven't needed his help for the last 5 years or so, just because we've been had everything pretty well straight. We just needed the time to pass. I think did I miss anything?
Well, I guess maybe just take a step back. What was your farm experience before you came to the farm, and, that got you to this interest and got you any kind of experience that gave you any kind of credibility as to be a farmer?
Yeah. I only ever had one job from when I graduated high school. 15 years I worked for a guy raising replacement dairy heifers and beef, doing a lot of haying, just equipment maintenance, all of the basic same skills I'm using now. So that's when I was working for there, I was realizing that I wanted to milk cows, and the reality was slipping away. So I was going to pasture walks, and that's where I met Mike. So I was going to three 4 pasture walks a summer, seeing how these other farms were milking 30, 40 cows, which is the style of farming that I was interested in. I really didn't want to milk 400 or 500 cows.
And you're milking 660 now?
Yeah, now I'm milking 60, and that's basically what the facilities hold. It's a tie stall barn, so we're not switching any animals out. I'm not sure where that's going to go into the future. There isn't the land at this particular location to get any bigger. And that's one of the challenges. That is going to be one of the next challenges for this farm for sure. Is how are we going to keep the income up with the lack of land?
And right now you already lease about half of your acres.
Yeah, probably half of
from other parties other than the current owner, I should say.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, half of the land is not owned by us. Yeah, it's all connected to the farm. No, that's going to be a challenge. It's not stuff that we can afford to buy, basically, in my opinion.
We might see if
we'll see. Yeah.
Were there any kind of cautions or advice that you would give to anybody in this position, whether they're coming at it from your side of the equation or from the senior side of the equation?
Yeah, a lot of the cautions that were told to me really didn't come to fruition. I think it's a lot has to do with the people that I was dealing with or have been dealing with. We've had a lot of fun milking cows. It wasn't the decision that a lot of people pushed me towards, but other than just working hard, it hasn't been unenjoyable at all. So
were you reflecting on the idea of having the owner still nearby? Did people caution you against that?
No, just what are you doing milking 60 cows, or how are you going to make a go at it doing that? But that really hasn't been the case. I'm not saying it's been easy, but it could have been a lot worse. But no, the prior owner lives right here too, and their kitchen window looks right into the barn, so that I'm sure has played into their role or equation into picking who they wanted around. But yeah, I don't think they're not going anywhere. They're gonna stay right here.
John and Beth did not have any children, and they didn't have any employees that they felt comfortable or would be capable or interested in taking over the farm, and hence that's where we needed to start to look for another successor. And we did actually have it advertised on New England Farm Finder, and there were a number of people who did come along and express interest, but none of them panned out. And it was just serendipity that I was at the Beidler's pasture walk, as I like to get the pasture walks and veggie twilight meetings, so I can learn more about what's going on the farms that I'm ultimately working with, but also just to meet people. And sometimes these kind of things can happen. It was not what I was expecting that day. We got lucky. We got really lucky with meeting up with Baird that day.
And I don't recall, Mike. I'm sure I had seen you at other of the pasture walks, but that's definitely the one that sticks out to me. I had seen you other ones since, but
yeah, I don't think we had met. I definitely remember making sure I was going to introduce myself before I left. And he had his little boy who's carrying him around, and I let him play with my hat because he was getting a little fidgety. So,
fidgety.
I think the other thing, there was this original idea you mentioned, Baird, about you coming in and financing and buying cattle and equipment from them, and then the financing issue kind of changed that dynamic. When I first worked with John and Beth, question came up about would they offer seller financing, and I approach this very cautiously with people, especially, well, even when it is family, because you don't want a family relationship to go sour because a seller finance loan goes sour. And, and so that was nothing that John and Beth were putting out there as being available to anybody. But then as it turned out, when Baird came to work for them for a year rather than buying them out right away, it gave them a year to build trust among the parties so that they could feel comfortable offering the seller financing. And then there was also that compromise that they weren't going to be on the hook for everything. FSA is on the hook for the equipment loan, and John and Beth were just on the hook for the cattle loan, but they would not have made that seller financing just meeting somebody like Baird right off. I think they, it was that year of building trust that really helped facilitate that. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
I think that's 100% true. Yeah. And another aspect that's been very unique to our transition is, I worked for John for a year, seeing how he ran the farm. And since then, he hasn't told me how to run the farm. And that has been huge. Like I say, his kitchen window looks into the barn, and he's helping me every day, but he's not telling me what to do or how to do it. So that's huge.
Yeah. So anybody have any questions for Baird? You want to put them in the chat or speak up?
I just feel, Mike, like Baird's a case study for that young farmer who passionately wants something, and the ag community is like, yes, let's figure out how to help this. And I wish we could broadcast that intention to other people who are passionate but can't see the pathway, because I think there's a lot of people who want to help.
Right. And that's what we're trying to, we're hopefully trying to do here and elsewhere, is to make these connections and hopefully show people that there are these young people out there like Baird that want and have the capabilities if they're given the right opportunity, and even if they're not in your family.
And the opportunity is there too for my generation. You just have to go find it.
What do you want to say?
Baird,
I was going to ask Baird, how many acres do you have that you've got 60 cows on? And
yeah, so since I've had the cows, and this kind of goes back to John not telling me what to do, I bought the cows, rotationally grazing, getting 10 pounds of grain. I added some acreage, 30 miles away. I farmed that for 5 years, and I went to no grain. I milked no grain once a day for 2.5 years. And then I gave up that acreage that was over 30 miles away just this summer, and I went back to feeding grain again. So my acreage changed by 100 acres in 2025. And that's when I went back to feeding grain. But the home farm is 75 acres of open land and 75 acres of woods. And on the home farm, there's an additional 75 acres that we don't own. So on the home farm, we have 150 acres of grass that the cows can walk to. Just speak round numbers. So at the current time, I'm milking twice a day, 60 cows, and they're grazing on about 150 acres of grass.
And I'll just say, as we need to move on to to the next panelist, I did want to just mention, I think part of the reason why I'm optimistic that some of this land adjacent to theirs might be affordable is there's already, John and Beth put a conservation easement with the Upper Valley Land Trust on the farm as a part of the process. And I think there's definitely some interest in conserving the contiguous parcels to increase the size and viability of the farm. So, or at least protecting the viability of the farm, even if maybe they don't own it, but it gets protected. So we'll keep exploring. We'll keep exploring that with the adjacent property owners as it seems to be appropriate.
Yeah, and I think some of that needs to take place at the time of when it gets sold again. I think a lot of the landowners that are holding the land right now have made their decision, and the decision is not going to come back up again until it gets sold again.
Yeah,
it's kind of how I feel.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Baird. Much appreciated. And now we're going to move on to one more farm, but two speakers. We're going to have both generations for this. And I want to turn it over to Caroline.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Caroline Pam. I am co-founder of Kitchen Garden Farm in Sunderland, Mass. My husband and I started the farm in 2006 on a rented acre growing vegetables. And we grew the farm over 18 years to 65 acres, a commercial kitchen and value-added products business, selling wholesale specialty organic vegetables throughout the Northeast, and our products shipping nationwide. We sold the farm in May 2024 to Lily Israel, who's on this call, and you'll hear from her after, and Max Tronstein. And Lily and Max had been working with us at the farm for 8 and 10 years, respectively, at the time that my husband and I started thinking about what it might look like to offer the farm to transition to those two individuals. We weren't looking to post it. We weren't looking necessarily to sell it, but we were just at a phase of our life where we were imagining what the future might hold, and had in Max and Lily two folks who had been working with us and had moved into the top management positions at the farm. My husband and I were still hands-on, very much involved, but we had two individuals who really knew the farm, had helped us build the farm, and we had a lot of working trust with. And I recognized that, they were perhaps, I wondered whether they might be at a point in their careers where they might be looking for growth opportunities. And we had sort of gotten them as far as they could go in this farm operation. So at that time, we reached out to them in October of 2023 to see if they were interested, and learned that they were. So we then embarked on a process of trying to understand how we could make it financially feasible to sell the farm to two folks who didn't have cash to put down, and wanted to be operators. There's a lot more background I can give about our business. We had about 30 acres of land that we owned, about 30, I don't know, I can't remember if it's split 35 owned or leased, but half owned, half leased. Most of it was in APR. Some of the pieces we had purchased at development value and put into APR, and some of which we'd been able to acquire as APR. So that was an important function. But the transaction was tricky because there's just a lot of buildings and infrastructure. It was a pretty extensive collection of assets that we were trying to make possible for them to purchase. One of the most key concepts that we put into practice here in order to make it possible for them to get financing through FSA and Farm Credit East was that we had gotten a lot of grants over the years to help us build infrastructure, from food security infrastructure grants, APR improvement grants. So we determined that because of that state and federal investment in some of the assets that we had at the farm, we didn't need to recapture that in the sale. And so we offered to basically discount the price and price it at sort of 80% of appraised value, so that the new buyers would receive that equity, essentially, and would be able to use that as collateral for their loans. We also didn't assign any value to the business itself. That just conveyed with the assets. So we kind of broke it up into phases. We were on a really short timeline because we were trying to get the farm transition to happen before the next season began. And we had planned that we would try to close in February, but FSA, as everyone knows, was slow and was delayed. So we didn't end up closing until the end of May of that year in 2024. But that first phase, that first chunk was the business itself, the equipment, and most of the buildings. So we had a big commercial kitchen, we had a big warehouse wash pack, we had another big freezer storage building with a walk-in freezer. So that was a big package to get financed right off the bat. So then we continued to lease them the land for the most part for that first season, I guess for 2 seasons, because we only just finally closed on phase 2 in December of 2025. And that was, the concept was let them get their feet under them, let them get a couple seasons, and be able to demonstrate their ability to carry the loan servicing and get financing for that second phase. We had originally thought of pushing out even further some of that transfer, but a complicating factor was that Max was living in the employee housing on one of the APRs. That as part of the APR, the requirement was that was to be used exclusively for employee housing, for labor housing. And once he became the owner of the operation, he was no longer allowed to live there. So at the same time that they were purchasing the buildings and the equipment and taking over operation of the business, Max also had to buy and move to another house and move out of the convenient house across the street. So that was silly, but just facts of life. The other third part of this financing structure was the inventory. So we have a commercial kitchen, produced sriracha, salsa, dried chili products, jardinera, pickled vegetable products, and had not only pallets upon pallets of finished product in inventory, but also pallets upon pallets of preserved ingredients. And so that is the sort of thing that a bank is not really going to easily lend money for, because it really only has value to the operator. So we offered 0% financing on the inventory loan over 3 years. So that is the last piece of the farm sale that is still open. And there's another year of that. But that allowed Max and Lily to take ownership of all of that product from the get-go and keep selling it and produce cash flow for their first season. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts. And I think that there might be value in hearing from Lily about that. If anyone has any questions for that sort of opening structure, we can stop there for a minute.
I just put in for clarity that the ag APR, for those who are not in Massachusetts, is what Massachusetts calls their conservation easements, agricultural preservation restriction. And a question for that related to that. So you said you were selling buildings. Were those buildings on APR land, or how, like, that doesn't seem like you
Yeah.
Or were they disconnected from the APR land?
So we had 3 contiguous parcels at the home farm. One was the farmhouse that is not an APR, and that parcel also is what the commercial kitchen was built on. So that was one piece. There was the adjacent piece. Oh, also on that home farm field was the big freezer warehouse. So that was a big piece. There was a piece of land sandwiched in there that we only just sold in December, and that was complicated because we had high tunnels straddling property lines, and it didn't matter to us when we owned all 3 of them, but it mattered to FSA when they were thinking about collateral for each individual deeded parcel. So we had to go through extensive, silly exercises of estimating the cost to remove those tunnels, and estimating the cost to put in a separate road access to one of the buildings down there, and subtract that from the appraised value that they were willing to lend against. But then the second parcel, also contiguous, had the big wash pack and other tunnels and greenhouses on them. So forget even now what the question was.
Well, so where that wash pack was that not an APR, or was?
So yeah, the wash pack was on an APR parcel. And yeah, the tunnels were all on APR, but the house had the commercial kitchen and the freezer warehouse, and that was not APR.
So when you sold the buildings, you were selling that lot with it as well.
Yep,
Right.
that was part of phase one.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
some land went in phase one, but not all of it. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Correct.
I was just going to say, because you were asking about buildings built on APR land, the whole reason for the weird situation with my co-owner Max and the house that Caroline mentioned was that that house was illegally built on APR land. It was
by the previous owner.
By the previous owner. So before we had purchased that land, it had been built at the beginning of the APR program. It had never been dealt with. And when it transferred over to us, the sort of compromise was that it wasn't allowed to be lived in by owners of the farm, because as sort of punishment for the fact that it was illegally built on APR, it could only be used for employee housing was the compromise.
Yeah, that depressed the value of it. So when that owner sold that property to me, they didn't get to cash out on that illegal house.
Okay. Maybe Caroline, if you want to just, before we get to Lily, maybe if you could just go through the rest of the questions as far as challenges and useful help and so forth, cautions.
So one of the challenges was, just interest rates spiked during this process as we were negotiating and trying to settle the financing. We did our best to find like mission-driven lenders with lower interest rates, and we're able to get some of that and able to get as much as possible with FSA. I was very active in collaborative with Max and Lily in the financing process, just trying to put together the best package that could make the whole purchase more affordable and more sustainable long term. One just structural flaw I see in the system for anyone who wants to advocate is that the FSA max of $600,000 for direct farm ownership loans is completely inadequate to today's market. I mentioned most of these other challenges already sprinkled through. In terms of advice or guidance, we did work with Beneth Phelps at the Carrot Project. My husband and I sort of came up with the concept for the financing structure, but I valued being able to vet that with Beneth, who has a lot of experience with farm transfers. We did consult with John Jaffe at Farm Credit East on like the tax implications, but didn't get a lot of value out of that consult. One of the anticipated outcomes for us, my husband and I, as the sellers, was that we had depreciated as much as possible a lot of our investments over the years, to minimize our tax implications while we were the operators. But when it came time to sell, there was significant capital gains on a lot of that because they had all been fully depreciated already. So, we had a huge tax bill when things transferred. But that's just sort of like deferred taxes is how I have justified that in my mind afterward. I guess my word of advice just generally is, even if you're a young farmer, even if you have no thoughts of transfer or transition or succession, my husband and I just always, at every stage, with every decision about every investment, thought about whether it was an investment that could capture that value or could transfer to some future buyer, and just the implications of how each investment would not only impact our business plan in the current moment or in the 5-year term, but in the future. So those are some of my big takeaways. And just generally, one of the reasons I come on these panels is just to sort of normalize thinking about what comes after the time when you're the owner operator of your business. Farming is just an unusual career choice where people think of it more as a identity than a career. And I just think it's really valuable to think of it. I've always, like, the business that my husband and I built, we thought of as a professional organization and providing jobs and careers for people who wanted to farm seriously. And yeah, it's normal to make changes in your career, and it's normal for farms to have to transition. And I just think it's important to talk about that and to sort of destigmatize that.
Great. Thank you. I think that's that's definitely useful for people to hear. And I'll just make a note, if those of you who are on the tax segment will remember that Nick Bullock from Farm Credit East, the accountant, was cautioning exactly about what Caroline was talking about with the depreciation recapture, which is what has to get paid in that first year, and that's why it's important to consult with an accountant beforehand. If that was missed by John, it's disappointing to hear, but
I don't know that we would have changed anything. I just, might have been slightly better prepared.
But better prepared, right. And I just wanted to ask if people, maybe we have 1 minute for maybe questions, but Caroline, I did want to ask you, so when you were thinking about employees to take over, was it directly just the Lily and Max, or was there other people in consideration? Like, how did you go about that process of identifying those people, or is it just them? And then how did you start that conversation with them?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty clear. Lily was our sales manager, and had come up through all of the roles in a lot of the areas that I managed at the farm, in harvest, in wash pack, in value-added product, mail order, and sales. And so, yeah, just in terms of there was nobody else at the organization that had all of that experience and that I had worked so closely with, that I felt confident would be able to run with it easily. And Max similarly had taken on the production management and had an active role in the kitchen operations prior to the point where we built it on the farm, but had knowledge of that part of the business. And yeah, just was extremely well equipped to take over the crop planning and the farm equipment management, and had been sort of doing that part of the business for a long time, as my husband and I had put our energy into developing and growing the kitchen operation. So yeah, it wasn't like I was considering others, really.
And just a word about how you introduced the idea to them.
I think we just posed a question. I think we had the conversation first with Max and then very quickly after with Lily of like, would you be interested? Just to like get a sense. And it was a quick yes from Max. It was a slower yes from Lily. I'll let her speak to that.
Yeah, so maybe we'll move on to Lily then.
Yeah, hi. All right, so a lot of these questions have been covered by Caroline very well. So I don't want to be redundant, but yeah, I'm the successive owner at Kitchen Garden Farm. Caroline gave you an overview of our business, and yeah, Caroline approached me and Max in August of 2023, I believe. And like she said, it was a pretty quick yes from Max, with the caveat, yes, if the finances can work, because he had nothing at all to put down. And so this offer obviously was incredibly unique, that they came to us and said, we want to sell you the farm, and we want to find a way to do it where you don't have to put anything down. Both of us have been farming as mostly the only jobs we've ever done. We don't have a ton of money. I happen to have some family money and inheritance, so I could have put a small amount down, but nowhere near the amount needed to buy the size of operation that we were looking into taking over. But yeah, as Caroline said, I was a little more hesitant. I was, wanting to make sure that the business was sustainable, and in a big part wanting to make sure that that becoming the owner was something that I felt like I was ready to do. And I I went to school for farming. I studied sustainable agriculture at UMass, and I had been farming since then. But I had gone from in college wanting to own my own farm to the more I farmed, the more I felt I don't know that I need to own my own farm. I just maybe want to work in farming. I felt, for the rest of my life, for the rest of my career, I want to be doing farming, but owning a farm is just so much on top of that. It's doing more work than you would do it as an employee and having less stability in your income is what it felt to me. Even though farm workers are really low paid, at least they know that they're getting a paycheck. And when you're a farm owner, that's really volatile. You don't actually know. And so that felt difficult for me. And the social interpersonal component of becoming the boss to people I had worked alongside for many years was something that I had to decide I could feel okay with. And that took some time. So it was a few months of thinking about it before I decided that I was on board. And, we did a lot of going through the financials of the farm. I mean, we had to do that anyway to be applying for the loans. And, feel that it's a really unique business that Tim and Caroline built. It is a profitable farm business, which is rare. And it's in large part due to, like, as Caroline said, all the grants that they applied for and all the willingness that they had to take risks in growing the business and to do things like build a commercial kitchen that cost a lot of money and was a huge risk, but has really paid off. And 60% of our revenue comes from our value added products at this point. And yeah, that's also in terms of talking about me being a farm owner. I am much more risk averse than Tim and Caroline are. They made really big decisions that at the time, even as an employee, scared me. Building the commercial kitchen, also during the pandemic, making a really fast and strong pivot towards doing a home delivery business that included buying lots of refrigerated trucks, building an extra big cooler on the farm, hiring on a bunch of an extra third more people to be working on the farm doing this. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a big change to be making. Like, I'm freaked out. What if this doesn't work? And it totally did work. That was during the pandemic, it really, really helped people to be doing that home delivery. It helped individuals who couldn't go to the grocery store, and it helped farmers who needed a direct outlet to sell stuff. And it really helped us as a farm. It was incredibly profitable to do that for the time that we did it. And then also, Caroline stopped it as soon as she felt that the sales were going downward, and multiple other home delivery businesses that came in during COVID and have now gone out, waited way too long to go out, and now are in huge amounts of debt and can't pay their vendors. So anyway, Tim and Caroline are very shrewd business people, and made a lot of decisions that were able to build it to a 65-acre business with 30 employees at the height of the season. And I think if I had started my own farm business from scratch, I can't imagine ever having gotten to this size and complexity of a business model. But I feel really, really appreciative to have been able to take over what already existed here and to have worked at the farm for 8 years before I took it over, so that I knew all the complexities of the business and felt really comfortable being able to continue on what what they've done. And, you know, people ask me and Max all the time about what we're going to change. I mean, especially when we were first buying the farm, what we were planning to change when we took over. And we were like, we're not planning to change anything. We just want to like always be getting better at the things that we do. But we bought this farm because we have worked here for close to a decade and we like what this farm does. And we think that that it's done well here. And, you know, all we want to do is get better at what we're
Uh-oh. Did just Lily freeze up?
Lily's, yeah, just Lily's frozen.
Uh-oh. Hopefully that'll rectify itself.
Mm. I could take questions if anyone had any.
Yeah, I was gonna say, anybody have any questions or any of the, panelists want to maybe chime in there while on any thoughts that have come to mind hearing your other fellow speakers.
Sarah?
I just have a question. They were so successful in grant writing. Did you have a grant writer? Did you learn to write your own grants? How did that work?
Yeah, I just wrote the grants.
Yeah.
MDAR has really great opportunities, and yeah, I prioritized carving that time out of my workday because it's just a really, really useful investment. And, you know, so here's another takeaway. I sometimes give workshops on grant writing for farmers. And I had some guilt at a certain point where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting another grant. Oh, good, Lily's back. I'm just going to finish this thought and then we'll go back to you. But ultimately, I came around to realize that like these state and federal investments in our farm economy are essential. And when they can convey with an operation and keep that productive capability intact, that's a very sound investment. So I felt in the end, very comfortable and encourage farms to take advantage of grants when they can.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll get back to you, Lily. Hopefully the internet doesn't fail on you.
My internet cut out for a second. I don't know what happened. But I think I was just in the middle of saying that I don't know if Caroline responded to my positing that this is part of it, but that they're always very forward thinking and trying to think of ways to grow the business, and just very creative people who didn't want to ever stagnate. Whereas Max and I are much more happy and satisfied to just like do something that we like and it's going well and not risk anything and just sort of make efficiencies in what we already have going. But anyway, it's been under 2 years since we took over the farm, but it's been 2 full growing seasons. And it's been going really well so far. The first season was definitely had some challenges, one of them being that the sale didn't go through until May 31st, which meant that we had this backlog of expenses taken on by the old business towards the new growing season that we had to figure out how to sort out and repay, like seeds that had been purchased and all the labor done growing things in the greenhouse to get planted that would be harvested under our LLC instead of theirs. And so we owed them for the labor spent doing that and the seeds and all this stuff, which made us start out at sort of in the red in a way that we wouldn't have potentially if we had been able to start ourselves and gone through that time of paying for people to grow stuff and paying for seeds while also harvesting the winter greens that we grow March through the end of May in tunnels that are really high value product, really high margins, and help to pay for those seasonal startup costs. So that left us in a sort of difficult position our first season. There are also lots of other initial costs. One of the things that we along with wanting to raise the FSA minimum, another thing we would appreciate from policymakers is to cap how many times you can pay sales tax on a used vehicle, or cap farms having to pay that sales tax, because farms are tax exempt for most things, but they do have to pay sales tax on vehicles. And we were buying tons of vehicles from the old LLC that had already been sold multiple times. They were bought by the previous LLC used. They had maybe been used before that. And we paid over $10,000 in sales tax on our fleet of vehicles. So that was just like, felt like an unnecessary burden on us. You know, I feel the state has already received taxes for those things. But that's a Massachusetts thing. I don't know if Vermont has different policies around sales tax on those things. But yeah, we ended our first season not in a really great financial position, but still we have an operating loan through Farm Credit East that buoys us through difficult times as a farm. The old LLC held the same operating loan, and that's, you know, it helps us make payroll when we're super in debt. And but now we've gotten to the point where this year we had gone from having a huge amount taken out of our operating loan to having nothing taken out of our operating loan. We had a really good second season. We basically made up for all those losses in the first season. And not quite enough yet to be paying ourselves really, but enough that everything else on the farm is running smoothly. So it's been a learning curve, but I think, you know, Max and I both came in uniquely well positioned to do that, having basically done, you know, we basically each were a 1-for-1 replacement in a way for each of the previous owners. And I'm super glad that we did it together. I think it would have been really challenging for either of us to take it on alone. I think as someone else said, you know, when they're a couple and their kid took over the business, that then they went from 2 owners to 1, and that's a huge loss of labor into it. And it's also, you know, the division of labor that goes on. It's different at every farm, but if you have 2 owners, you're going to have a big division of labor, and switching to just 1 is not going to be anywhere near that. So yeah, having each of us carry on specific institutional knowledge from each one of the owners was completely invaluable. And I feel like we came in really well prepared to take over the business. And Tim and Caroline have been really available to answer questions when it's needed. We didn't set out any sort of specific guidelines around that. We had discussed momentarily having some sort of framework around which they would be
like a retainer or something.
Yeah. But we didn't end up doing that. And I don't feel like we've, you know, we ask questions as needed, but it's super frequent or super structured. I was going to say we've had meetings about stuff, but mostly that's been about finances, about making sure that the rest of the sale went through, because as Caroline said, the remainder of the land sale only happened last month.
Yeah.
So that was still a big thing we were talking through until recently, but mostly we've been doing it on our own with, you know, they provided lots and lots of resources before the sale went through, and then we're very clear that they didn't want to be in our way, and they didn't want to be, you know, staring over our shoulder, and that we were buying the farm free and clear. And other than a 5-year, I don't know what the word is, but like,
oh, right, the vested interest in the value-added business.
Value-added business, so that it couldn't be that we could buy the value-added business, which was a really profitable, helpful business, and then resell it a year later and also make back that 20% discount on the wholesale that they had given us. That there was a vesting for 5 years until we would, just that if we resold it, they would receive part of the proceeds of that sale until 5 years passed. And then if we resold it, we would receive the whole proceeds of the sale. Not that we will sell it in 5 years. Yeah. And also they said to us when we first bought it, I remember that they were like, if you're not willing to own this farm for at least 10 years, don't go through all of this, because it's just going to be, it's not worth it. And definitely both of us, you know, see it as our passion and our career. And, you know, I'm not looking at a time where we're gonna move along from it at this point. I mean, Max and I are both 33, so we're both you know, right at an early point in our lives and our careers, and we're planning to own the farm for quite a while.
Thank you, Lily. As we've got less minute left here, I just want to thank Lily and Caroline again, and all our presenters. Point out that there is an evaluation form in the chat. Are there any pressing questions that people have in the last minute or so here? Give one chance, people. I just did want to ask Lily. So you still have two owners, but now instead of a married couple, you have two individuals who are just business partners. Does that change the dynamic at all, or how does that, you know, just comment on that at all?
Yeah. We both feel really good about owning a business not as a married couple and not as romantic partners at all. You know, it's great to go home to our separate households and be able to talk to our separate partners about what's going on in the business, and you know, not bring the conversations home with us as much. I mean, obviously we were both asking our partners' opinions about stuff and talking about the farm all the time when we're not there, but it's not, you know, you can't lay in bed at night and be like, did you roll up the size of the greenhouse? Did you pay that bill? And so yeah, I'm really grateful for that. And you know, we've worked together for a really long time. And I didn't mention this, but we also went to school together. We both studied agriculture at UMass and graduated in the same year. So we've known each other for a long time. And it's a really good working relationship, really nice to have that separation so that it doesn't feel so personal. And it does feel more like work. You know, Caroline was saying it's a hard thing, or it's an interesting thing, farming, because it's our identities, and we definitely still feel it as our identities, but it's not like our family is the farm and everything we have and own and do is the farm. We have that, and it's a big part of our identity, but we also get to have our own separate lives and go on vacation separately. And so, yeah, we've each taken like pretty good separate vacation times off from the farm because the other person's there. So that's nice.
I would add that my husband and I also saw this ownership model as sort of a risk management benefit, in that you each have other partners who have other jobs. And so it's not all on the line in your one single shared household tied up with the farm. So I think it's actually a little bit more stable in that way too.
Right. We each have secondary incomes in our households.
Well, thank you again for those insights. Thank you everybody for being here for the panel and for the series. I think everybody got to see we had some very different stories and different trajectories, and there's a lot of different ways that this can go forward. Please reach out if you want any assistance from us. And thank you again, everybody. Enjoy the winter.